Hi, today we're reviewing the Chemistry of Life Biomolecules chart. And I wanted to just take the opportunity to review that biomolecules are also known as biological macromolecules and also known as carbon-based molecules or organic molecules. I know that's a lot of words that kind of mean the same thing, but we're talking about um, carbohydrates, lipids, proteins, and nucleic acids. So we're going to start talking about carbohydrates and kind of go through the chart. You want to double check your chart as you're watching this video. Carbohydrates are made of the elements carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen. So the C stands for carbon, H for hydrogen, O for oxygen. And they provide quick energy, structural support in plants, and they also make up additional cell parts. Some examples would be starches and cellulose. You could also say glucose, fructose, sucrose. Any of those would be perfectly acceptable. In terms of chemical structure, you could put a lot of different things here in terms of images from Google. What I would make sure you understand is that carbohydrates make rings of carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen. In terms of food, we're looking at sugars, pastas, breads, cereal, potatoes. That's a common starchy plant. Again, storage, vegetables, some vegetables, corns, so on and so forth. Moving on, let's look at proteins. Just changing up my pen color here. When we're looking at proteins, proteins are primarily made of the elements carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, and nitrogen. Some amino acids contain sulfur, but carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, and nitrogen are our primary elements that make up a protein. In terms of function, this is a very diverse group. So a lot of different functions, looking at, proteins, growth, structure, repair. They send messages in living things. They help speed up chemical reactions. Some examples of where proteins are found in muscles, hair, nails, enzymes are examples, in the heart. Hemoglobin is a blood protein. In terms of drawing something with a chemical structure, you would want to know that there's nitrogen bound to a carbon, and then we have a double bond to oxygen, and then another oxygen and hydrogen. So I kind of went over a little bit here. And then off of this side would be the R group, and that R group varies depending on what type of amino acid we're looking at. What types of foods have proteins in them? Meats, beans, eggs, fish, milk, cheeses. Moving on to lipids. As we talk about lipids, lipids are again primarily made of carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen. Lipids are fats, oils, and waxes, and they kind of get a bad rap as being bad for you in terms of foods. But what they're really good at doing is they're good at storing energy. In many organisms that hibernate, they are that long-term food storage. For animals and other organisms that live in colder weather, they serve as insulation. They help create cell membranes, and they also serve sending messages to the body in terms of hormones and neurotransmitters. When we're looking for, lipids and trying to identify them and what's a lipid, you want to look for this fatty acid, this zigzag, if you will. And the zigzag is a fatty acid tail. It's all carbons at the points, and then coming off of the carbons are hydrogens. Some examples of lipids would be butter, anything that's like kind of fatty or oily, chocolate has a good amount of fat in it. A lot of nuts have fats in it, like nut butters, peanut butters as well. Lastly, here we've got nucleic acids. Nucleic acids consist of carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, nitrogen, and phosphorus. So this is a new one. None of the other groups contain the element phosphorus. So you can always identify a nucleic acid by the presence of phosphorus. In terms of function, DNA, the double helix, we kind of represent it as a twisty ladder. It contains genetic information. And then RNA is kind of like DNA's cousin. It helps make proteins, and it looks like kind of like half of a little DNA. Sorry for my rudimentary drawings there. In terms of chemical structure, I'm going to zero in on the little piece that makes up a nucleic acid called a nucleotide. In a nucleotide, we have a phosphate group. We usually represent with a circle. We have a 5-carbon sugar, which is a ring structure. And then coming off of the 5-carbon sugar is a base. And that base, I'm just going to make like a kind of big square and put a big B for a base. And that base is primarily made of nitrogen. And believe it or not, every food that you eat contains nucleic acids because foods came from something. So plants have DNA, animals have DNA. So everything you're eating in some capacity has something, has DNA in it, has nucleic acids, which is kind of a interesting way to think about things. So again, we have our 4 different biomolecules: carbohydrates, proteins, lipids, and nucleic acids. And then we want to think about the elements that make them up. What do they do? Some examples. Where are they found in food? Can we pick them out based on a chemical structure? And then the next level is thinking about what monomers they have, what little pieces make up each of those groups.